Dear friends, my name is Yevheniia Motorevska. I'm the editor-in-chief of Ukrainian media Hromadske, and I had a long and difficult trip to Sofia from Kiev, but I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad to open this important discussion today. And I would like to tell a little about the media which I represent today. Hromadske is a unique media in Ukraine with a unique history. It was founded in 2013 by a group of independent journalists as a reaction to censorship under the regime of former Ukrainian pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. And Hromadske was the first Ukrainian television station whose owner were not oligarchs or Ukrainian politicians, but independent journalists. In 2020, we had to close classic television station because it's very expensive for independent broadcaster to maintain the large staff. But now we are developing all our social medias, and we are developing our YouTube and independent journalism. Hromadske started work during the Revolution of Dignity with the round-clock streams for the main square of Ukraine. And then when the war started in 2014, we covered the combat operation in the east of Ukraine and coverage of fighting against Russian aggression and Russian propaganda is in our DNA. Before the start of full-scale war, Hromadske worked as ordinary politician media, and our main topics were medicine. We cover COVID-19, human rights, education, politics. But after the start of full-scale war, we had completely rebuilt the work of editorial team and changed our focus. On this photo, our excellent war reporter Nastya Stanko. She is covering war during eight years, and now she is mom of a 1-year-old child, but every 2 weeks she visits combat zone and prepare excellent reports about excellent professional reports about war and about war crimes in the east of Ukraine and in the south of Ukraine. Now we have a small team, 6 journalists, cameramen, newsfeed and social media editors. 2 of our colleagues this summer joined Ukrainian Armed Forces. They are our friends. They cannot influence our editorial policy and our materials, but we support them and they support us. And perhaps is it not surprising that our main topic after full-scale invasion, of course, war. Since February, our audience grown several times. Now we have 1 million followers on Twitter, more than 1 million followers on Facebook, and we are also developing Instagram and English language Twitter. Every month we have 15-20 million views on our YouTube. We publish all our video with English subtitles, and now we are also looking for a tool that will help us to translation our videos into other languages. But nevertheless, a third of our views there is foreign audience. and now we are watched in the USA, in the European Union, in the United Kingdom, and in Russian Federation. Each video from frontline or from near front areas usually has 1 million or more views on our YouTube. And we preparing materials on war crime, killings, deportation of Ukrainian children, tortures of civilian, destruction residence building, crimes against war prisoners and hostages. And the majority of Ukrainian journalists today work as war reporters too. This is a profession that usually takes years to master, but Ukrainian journalists had only a few weeks to do so, and our young employees learn to be war reporters in the field. And the safety of our reporters and our member of our team, of course, is the main challenge for me as editor and for all our team. It's about our YouTube. The second huge problem now is working conditions. In fact, we are already used to working from basements and shelters. And unfortunately, we are no longer afraid of Russian missiles because all our team continued to work in Kiev. But this autumn there was a new challenge. There is a blackout in Kiev and interruption with the internet. There are photos from Kiev. And since Russia is destroying our civilian infrastructure, Ukrainian state bodies forced to turn off the electricity every day, and some of my colleagues spent 8-10 hours without electricity. Of course, this makes our work very difficult. And last week we were forced to buy additional equipment to our office, Starlink system, autonomous charging station, solar panels, but there is no sun in Kiev. But this does not solve the problem globally, and we expect that the situation may worsen later in the winter. But the most important challenge, in my opinion, remains mental health, because we are not just journalists, we are citizens of our country. On the other hand, our close people often fight against Russian soldiers in the front line. We're losing our friends, our colleagues, and we are witnessing strong economic inflation in Ukraine, and we are living without electricity, but on the other hand, we also work with dozens of terrible stories about war crimes, sexual crimes, about death, captivity, deportation. And in September, our journalist Olesa Beda worked for a long time in the liberated area in the east of Ukraine. And when she got home, she stopped throwing away food and bread because she saw people who pass out without food. And each of our journalists has dozens of such stories. Recently, our partners from the EU paid for individual session with a psychologist for our journalists and editors. Colleagues have the opportunity to visit retreats both in Ukraine and abroad, if they're girls, because Ukrainian men cannot leave Ukraine. But I understand that when the war ends, we will have a huge problem with burnout and outflow of personnel in profession, and I think we will reach all the horrors of war only later. I have already said that in this war we are not only journalists but also citizens of the country attacked by Russian Federation, and of course it affects our work. Of course our approaches have changed after full-scale invasion, and the main rule for Ukrainian journalists is do not harm. A few days ago, we had an interesting case. The New York Times published news with reference to Ukrainian officials that Kyiv will evacuate 3 million people if there are a total blackout. Most of the Ukrainian media report this news, and as usual, a scandal began in Ukrainian social network. Many people wrote that they were upset by this news, and later it turned out that the journalist had incorrectly translation of officials' position, and there is no reason to start evacuate in Kyiv during this time. Ukrainian experts criticize our media for reporting this news with a loud headline. And the main argument was for the audience of New York Times. It's just another news about Ukraine, but for audience of the Ukrainian media, there is information about safety of their lives, and of course, it's very important. And Ukrainian media have to be very responsible, more than, for example, foreign journalists and international media, and actually I agree with that. On the other hand, we have legal restriction in our work. In February, martial law was declared in Ukraine, and for example, we cannot write about Ukrainian personal laws. We cannot cover details of military operations or number of weapons. But on the other hand, we have a lot of internal restrictions that we define as editors. For example, I think a few weeks ago, we refused to publish an interview with liberated war prisoners in a situation where it could harm people who are still in captivity. We also had to postpone the publication of article about deportation of Ukrainian children, so as not to harm to process of their return home. Another important role that the local media in Ukraine currently play in the coverage of internal process in Ukraine, because when foreign journalists usually visit Ukraine, they are working in the combat zone, and they are working in liberated territories. And perhaps I will surprise you, but judicial reform is currently being implemented in Ukraine. Our anti-corruption bodies have been working in recent months, and political processes are coming to life in Ukraine, and we have feelings that some Ukrainian politicians start to prepare to the elections after our victory. And of course, it's very important to Ukrainian journalists highlight this process and control internal movement in Ukraine. Despite all legal restrictions, our journalists have the opportunity to criticize government, and we like to do it. And during the last months, we have two high-profile investigation about the deputy head of president's office. It's a screen from Hromadske, and I can translate it as deputy head of president's office Kirilo Tymoshenko drive a car which provides for humanitarian mission. And the other high-profile investigation was about head of one of the frontline regions of Ukraine. And I think even in conditions of full-scale war, we managed to maintain freedom of speech in Ukraine. And I'm proud of my Ukrainian colleagues and my team too. Thank you, Bora.
If you can just stay here. Thank you so much, Yevheniia. Well, we're running late, but I want to give the audience a chance to maybe ask a few questions. I mean, Yevheniia will participate in a panel discussion shortly, but if anyone has like a burning question right now, there's one over there.
Could you give us
just 1 second. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Tsvetana Balabanova from BTV Television. Could you give us some more details about what is like forbidden, or what do you not report about, like numbers of weapons, but some more information? And do you have the information and you don't report it, or you don't have access to such kind of information?
Of course, we live in Ukraine. We have a lot of sources, and of course we have a lot of information about military operations in the east of Ukraine, in the south of Ukraine, but we cannot share it now. I hope and I believe that when the war will end, we have a lot of investigation. For example, I don't know why Russian Federation could occupy the south of Ukraine in a few days, and in the Ukrainian society we have a lot of questions to our government, but I think we will do it only after our victory. But you asked me about what do you mean about weapon?
I meant that, for example, do you have the information about how many weapons have arrived in Ukraine and you don't report it, or you don't know?
Usually we know some details, but we cannot share this information now.
And if someone shares it, what would be the consequences?
I think it will be criminal responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, did you say, I think I heard you say that your reporting is also available in Russia. Is that correct? Or in Russia, can Russian citizens hear or read your reporting, or is it censored? Which is very interesting because
Russian citizens cannot read our website because it was banned a few years ago on the Russian territory. But of course, Russian citizens can watch our videos on YouTube channel. I think they can use VPN, it's not a problem, and near 10% views we have from Russian Federation.
so it's censored. Yeah. Does Starlink help?
It's hard question because we bought it only a few days ago, and when I spent time in Sofia, my colleague now attesting it. But I hope yes, because our defenders, I think during last 4-5 months, use it in the front line.
Okay, so I'm Angel Petrov. I'm a journalist at the Bulgarian website. Just a very brief question. I imagine that over these past 8 months, there has been at least one or more situations where you obtain some exclusive information and have huge dilemma whether to publish it or not. Could you tell us about one such example and what did you do actually?
I think in this situation, at first, we are citizens. And I said that our main role is do not harm. And of course, we cannot publish some exclusive. Sometimes we have, I think we will talk about it later, but in Ukraine we have a very strange situation when, for example, Ukrainian military forces liberate some territories. All of them post about it on social networks. Our member of parliament wrote about it in our social, in their social medias, but we can do it. And sometimes, of course, we have a lot of sources in the front line. We have our relatives in front line, in occupied territory, and usually we have this information too, and sometimes we have this information earlier than other people, but as media, we cannot do it. But bloggers and ordinary people sometimes do it.